Now, the first thing, though, that we have to do is to get our perspectives with some background about the basic ideas which influence our everyday common sense, our fundamental notions about what life is about. Ideas of the world which are built into the very nature of the language we use, and of our ideas of logic and of what makes sense altogether. And these basic ideas I call myth, not using the word myth to mean simply something untrue, but to use the word myth in a more powerful sense. A myth is an image in terms of which we try to make sense of the world. We have this hostility to the external world because of the superstition, the myth, the absolutely unfounded theory that you yourself exist only inside your skin. Now, I want to propose another idea altogether. If you think that you are only inside your skin, you define yourself as one very complicated little curlicue, way out in space and way out in time. Billions of years ago, you were a big bang. Now you're a complicated human being. But so we define ourselves as being only that. And then we cut ourselves off and don't feel that we're still the Big Bang. But you are. Depends how you define yourself. You are the Big Bang, the original force of the universe coming on as whoever you are. See, when I meet you, I see not just what you define yourself as, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so. I see every one of you as the primordial energy of the universe coming on at me in this particular way. I know I'm that too. But we've learned to define ourselves as separate from it. You and I are all as much continuous with the physical universe as a wave is continuous with the ocean. The ocean waves, and the universe peoples. And as the wave, I wave at you and say, you. The world is waving at me with you. And saying, hi, I'm here. But the way we feel and sense our existence, being based on a myth that we are made, that we are parts, that we are things, our consciousness has been influenced so that each one of us does not feel that. We feel we have been hypnotized, literally hypnotized, by social convention into feeling and sensing that we exist only inside our skins, that we are not the original bang, but just something out on the end of it, and therefore we are scared stiff. My wave is going to disappear, and I'm going to die, and that would be awful. You are a fluke. You are a separate event. And you run from the maternity ward to the crematorium, and that's it. Now, why does anybody think that way? There's no reason to, because it isn't even scientific. It's just a myth. If there is any such thing at all as intelligence and love, beauty, well, you found it in other people. In other words, it exists in us as human beings. And as I said, if it is there in us, it is symptomatic of the scheme of things. We are symptomatic of the scheme of things as the apples are symptomatic of the apple tree or the rose of the rose bush. When, as a scientist, you describe the behavior of a living organism, you try to say what a person does. It's the only way in which you can describe what a person is. Describe what they do. Then you find out that in making this description, you cannot confine yourself to what happens inside the skin. So if that is necessary, if in other words, in order to describe my behavior, I have to describe your behavior and the behavior of the environment, it means that we've really got one system of behavior. that what I am involves what you are. I don't know who I am unless I know who you are. And you don't know who you are unless you know who I am. In other words, we are not separate. We and our environment, and all of us and each other, are interdependent systems. We know who we are in terms of other people. We all lock together. And any good scientist knows that what you call the external world is as much you as your own body. But the problem is, you see, we haven't been taught to feel that way. The myths underlying our culture and underlying our common sense have not taught us to feel identical with the universe, but only parts of it, only in it, only confronting aliens. And we are, I think, quite urgently in need of coming to feel that we are the eternal universe, each one of us. Otherwise, we're going to go out of our heads.
Now, if we go to each person in this room, every person will have a story about a moment of that recognition that things aren't the way they seem. That the conceptual model that you and I became conspirators to about what is reality is actually this fragile veil we put up against the unknown. And if we put it up really out of fear, we make it impermeable out of fear. What seems to have gotten screwed up is the balance in us, the way I'm experiencing it. That you started out when you were born with this undifferentiated self. There weren't a boundary saying this is me and that's other. That was something you learned. Now, the fact that you learned it was necessary. And you learned it and it had a genetic origin, it had a environmental origin, because your parents all thought they were somebody. And they took you into somebody training. I mean, that was part of the culture you lived in. We were born to a family that thought they were somebody. I mean, really thought it, not just relatively. I think I'll play somebody. They thought they were somebody. And they thought, I'll train my child to be somebody. That's the best thing I can do for you. And the more special you are, the better somebody you are. So you and I got trained into somebody specialness. Because this is a culture of somebody. When your identity is with your individuality, not your identity as part of the unity of things. It's interesting that people are waking up to their interdependence, while other cultures always lived with their interdependence. Native Americans always knew they were interdependent. And we're suddenly, wow, we're interdependent. Wow, imagine that. Physics is right. The balance that got off was that we started out with this undifferentiated self, and we so well learned, because we learned it emotionally as well as intellectually, we so well learned our separateness, that our separateness veiled over the connection we had to the unity of all things. That was the imbalance. Because once we awaken, which is what we're talking about here, to realize you're part of everything, that it's all relative reality, that there's something behind it all, it's all one God, one, whichever way, whatever metaphor you want to use, you're awakening back into the balance. And at first, when you recognize that there's a unity behind the diversity, the whole awakening metaphor tends to pull you towards pushing away at the diversity and grabbing at the unity, because you've lost it so far and you want to taste it again, because when you experience the unity, you feel at home in the universe. Because you are the universe. You're not vulnerable, you're not afraid of death, because where are you going to go? But then you realize, somewhere along the way, that to just acknowledge the unity, to acknowledge the non-conceptual part of your identity, to acknowledge your divinity, that itself, to push away your diversity, to push away your incarnation as a separate entity, that's an imbalance too. It's imbalance the other way. And you then begin to see the exquisiteness of the human incarnate, the diversity. Something we know tells us about the formless that is within or behind. I mean, all those are just metaphors about form and formless. Two sides of the same coin, whatever you want to call it. And the predicament is that that part of our identity, which is known by our senses and our thinking mind, that is, those parts of our identity that we can objectify, since you sense something and you think about something, those parts have fascinated us so much that they are like loud trumpets that have overwhelmed us so that we haven't heard what the Quakers call the still small voice within, which is that part of ourselves which is not object, but which is subject, which is not knowable, it is just real. It's like flashlights, which you shine on this and that, and you say, oh, it's that, oh, it's that, oh, it's that. And the one thing the flashlight can't do is shine on itself. So that you never see that which is seen. So that part of you that is just the seer, the wisdom, the source, the subject, you never notice it. It's not noticeable. It's just beatable. Realizing that is what the journey becomes is one of extricating yourself from your definitions of yourself.
You see, it's really, in a way, the same idea as the Hindu.
Yeah.
When the Christian speaks of God giving the creature freedom of will, the Hindu says, no, God gets lost in that and gives up
Johanna, like,
power.
happy or upset when she went to Rome?
And
Yeah, she's good. Okay.
it's really the same thing. It's the idea that the all-powerful surrenders power.
If I want to ask them if it's clear, I would say, does that
So
make
the-
sense?
the more
stop saying that.
you
I
give
feel
the
like
power
the sense
away,
and the logic has become less central in my life.
What you're really doing is
It's
you're
like it's
othering
really
yourself.
capitalistic.
Now, the
But
more
I
you
think it's
other
interesting
yourself
that that's our
by giving power away,
verbiage for understanding.
more of a self you
It
are.
makes sense if it's logical.
Because
But I would say to
self-love
kids
are
now, is that
reciprocal.
clear or is that unclear? Rather than, does that make sense?
So you find that people who through
What's the distinction?
a sadhana, a yoga discipline, have overcome their ego,
If you say, does that make sense?
have transcended
you're
the
asking that it's
ego,
logical.
are tremendously
You say, is
strong
that clear?
personalities.
Do you understand it?
You would think theoretically they would all be non-entities and to lack entirely what psychologists call ego strength. But actually they're nothing of the kind. They are, every one of them, unique. They're all quite different from each other. And they are very, very, of course, strong characters. Because the more they have given it up, the more they get it. Let's put it in another dimension for the moment. Let's suppose we're thinking of a relationship that is not just people. People are very obviously other and independent of one's ego. Give it to everything. Say to everything. Say to it all, now it's your turn. Let's see what you're going to do. Let it happen. You know, you do this complete let-off of control. And you find, you get the sensation that everything else is living you. It lives you. That you've given away control, you see, to everything else. It's a lovely, irresponsible state of being. But then, you see, you do the flip. In giving away the control, you got it. You got the kind of control you wanted. That's to say, where you had a loving relationship with all, but you didn't have to make up your mind what it should do. You let it decide. Now, do you see that's how your bodies work? You don't have to make up your mind what your nerve cells are going to do. You've delegated all that authority. Lao Tzu puts it in this way: the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over. When merits are accomplished, it lays no claim. The more, therefore, you relinquish power, trust others, the more powerful you become. But in such a way that instead of having to lie awake nights, controlling, you do it beautifully by trusting the job to everyone else. And they carry it on. This seems a sort of paradox to say this. The principle of unity, of coming to a sense of oneness with the whole of the rest of the universe, is not to try to obtain power over the rest of the universe. That will only disturb it and antagonize it and make it seem less one with you than ever. The way to become one with the universe is to trust it as another, as you would another, and say, let's see what you're doing. In doing that, in saying that to everything else that you have been taught to think is not you, you are also saying it to yourself. Because finally, you do not know where your decisions come. They pop up like hiccups. People have a great deal of anxiety about making decisions. We're always worrying. Did I think this over long? Did I take enough data into consideration? And if you think it through, you find you never could take enough data into consideration. The data for a decision in any given situation is infinite. So what you do is you go through the motions of thinking out what you will do about this. And then when the time comes to act, you make a snap back. It's amazing how often it works. Warriors are people who think of all the variables beyond their control, what might happen. So then when you make a decision, and it works out all right, I think very little of it has much to do with conscious intent and control. But somehow or other, you are able to decide and control things more harmoniously if you delegate authority. Like very great businessmen are those who can delegate authority, trust others to work, because those are people developing businesses on the same basic structure that is fundamental to a living organism: delegation of authority. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over. You see, the more you let go and trust it, as if it were quite other than you, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other. If you try to find the identity of self and other by subjecting other to self, no good. If on the other hand you find it through giving self, that is control, over to other, trust me, you may make a mistake. You may make a bad gamble. In the long run, you are ending up which has the back in the leader. This is the way about constant delegation.
Once you recognize what this game or evolution is about, the evolution of power away from God and back to God. Once you understand what you're doing here on earth, the meaning of your every act starts to change. And pretty soon your whole life is designed towards awakening, because you understand that only in your own liberation from your attachments and clingings, not your responsibilities or your incarnation or your love, but from the clinging and grabbing, that only in that freedom lies the cessation of suffering. And it's only when you do as Christ admonished you to, know the Father, not talk about Him, not just pray to Him, but open yourself to become it. Only then the whole thing falls into place. And there's nothing else to do. There isn't any other game in town. There's nothing you can offer me that holds a candle to this process. And in order to go this journey, you finally demand of yourself the discipline of body, heart, and mind. The quiet mind, that's why you meditate. The open heart, that's why you practice devotion. The strong body, that's why you concern yourself with your diet and your way in which you keep your body and maintain. Because when the Spirit of God enters you, you have to be able to withstand the power and the intensity of love, the brightness, the blinding brightness that would wither you were you not prepared. And all of yoga is the preparation to in truth become the bride of God. That's what it's about. That's what your births are about. That's what this life is about. And only you know in your heart what you have to do, because the Spirit speaks through your innermost being. It doesn't speak through some guy up here. I'm speaking, you are hearing, each of you is hearing a different thing that you need to hear. It is not for you to hear what I hear, it's for you to hear what you need. For the simple rules of this game are, listen to your innermost voice no matter what anybody tells you about how it ought to be. If this sounds like baloney, it's baloney. If it sounds clear and in harmony with your inner being, you tune to it. The minute there's a vibration that doesn't feel right, trust your heart. Don't trust me. You trust your own inner voice. You may make many errors trusting your inner voice by hearing the wrong voice. There are thousands of voices. Your ego will constantly mask itself as your spirit saying, listen to me. Go out and get as much as you can. And you go out and you suddenly feel it's not quite right. And listen. There's nothing wrong with falling on your face if you just get up and brush yourself out and get on. If you spend all this time in unworthiness and guilt because of all the stuff you've done that's gone against that inner voice in you, and this isn't man's morality there. You're just making choice after choice to go further away from God. Give up the guilt, give up the unworthiness, give up the self-pity, give up the anger, give up the greed, give up the lust. And every time you meet it again, give it up again. Here, Christ, you take it. That's what he went on the cross for, to take that stuff from you. That's what Kali is there for, the Hindu tradition, to take that stuff from you. That's what the Guru is there for, to take it from you. But you gotta want to give it out. You get to the point in this game where everything in you that is keeping you from getting home, you say, yeah. You look at a map and every side, no matter how pretty it is, not getting you home, it doesn't interest you. The first rule is listen to your inner voice. The second rule, be honest with yourself. Predicament is that you listen to your inner voice, it meets you in that, and then you outgrow it, and you don't want to admit you've outgrown it because you made a big investment in it. And you must be willing to stand naked as a newborn child again and again and again and again and again and again. The name of this game is surrender. Surrender of who you think you are and where you think it all is over and over again. Because what you see from 1,000 feet is not what you see from 2,000 feet and what you see from 3,000 feet. Truth and trust. Truth and trust. And that trust in your inner voice is based on the faith that there is a divine law which guides you, of which you are a part. When you look up, when you say, God know me, God help me, free me, God help me, that action of raising a hand, of reaching out, that's man's will, is what elicits grace. And grace is all of the beings on other planes or on this plane who are there only specifically to liberate you. But they are not living in time, and there's no rush from where they're sitting. So they're not going to come get you. You've got to initiate the action. Every morning at 4, Buddha would look out over all the Buddha fields to see who was ready for enlightenment. Who was ready? Christ says, with 2 or more are gathered in my name, there I am. You got to call me, then I come. That's the grace. The grace is drawn by you. And it's by you saying, I see my predicament, I want to get out, help me. Not with self-pity, but I'm ready to be counted. I am ready to stand naked before God. I am ready to come to the Father. I am ready now. I am ready to convert my life so the whole process is one of awakening. I am ready. I will lose myself 1,000 times into lust, greed, doubt, fear, anxiety, etc. And 1,001 times I will awaken and get up. And I won't waste time in guilt and shame. I'll just get on with it. That's the secret of the whole game.
So in the Taoist doctrines, there is a principle called Wu Wei. And this means, Wu means none or not, no, negation. Wei has a combination of meanings. It can mean action, making, but the best translation I have found for it is forcing. And so Wu Wei is the principle of not forcing in anything that you do. Now we know when we watch any performance of an artist, be it a dancer or an actor or a musician, we know immediately when the performance is forced. And we say it doesn't ring true, it's too artificial, it doesn't seem to be natural. Many people who study the Taoist doctrines think that Wu Wei means do nothing. In the sense of laissez-faire, be lazy, always be passive. It doesn't mean that. There is a time for action. When you study judo, you use muscle only at the right moment. When your opponent is hopelessly overextended and off balance, and you add a little muscle to it and you throw him across the room. But only then. You never use muscle at the wrong moment. For as Shakespeare knew perfectly well, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to fortune. And so Wu Wei is based on knowledge of the tide. The drift of things. Get with it. Wu Wei is the art of sailing rather than the art of rowing. So, if you say now, one of the most famous sayings in the Lao Tzu is, superior virtue has no intention to be virtuous. Thus is virtue. Inferior virtue cannot let go of virtuosity, and thus is not virtue. So one could also say, the real Wu Wei is not intentionally Wu Wei, and so is Wu Wei. But inferior Wu Wei so tries to be Wu Wei that it isn't. In other words, this is saying Wu Wei is not a matter of cultivated passivity or even of cultivated spontaneity. You have to be able to realize that you don't know what you really know until you are very quiet and it tells you. So, to quote Jesus, unless you become again as a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. But we understand heaven in a very literal sense. See, we are in heaven now because the earth is a spaceship and heaven is space. That's what is important. Most of us don't know this, but you know you are much more space than you are anything else. Space, which nobody can define, nobody can imagine, appears to be nothing, is the foundation of you. But you have to become again as a child to see that. So we get a funny feeling, because everybody knows what it's all about. Only they won't admit it. Being brought up is being taught not to admit it. You know very well what's going on. But in order to find out once more as an adult, you have to become against a child. So what's that involve? Means, ladies and gentlemen, would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? First of all your philosophical and religious views, all your logic. Because I say check it at the door, but I simply because you can navigate out if you feel unsafe. I'm not trying to argue. It is suggesting that red is not red. Just as if it were music. Can you hear the pulse? Can you hear the figure? Can you hear the listener? Where do the sounds come from? Ears alone, there's no mama, no hands. Let them tell you the truth. Really listen. Dig that sound.
Now, in the course of the years, I've developed a lot of very strange friends. And one of them is a being named Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is interesting because Emmanuel doesn't have a body. He's a being on another plane, and he speaks through a woman named Pat Rodegast. And Emmanuel had a good teaching. Let me read you one of the things he said to me. He said, "You are here because you chose to be here, because this is a learning place. Each lifetime is a wonderful opportunity to expand your consciousness and to move closer, ever closer to your oneness with God. This happens in very small stages. First, oneness with self, oneness with your human community, then oneness with God. It cannot be done in one blinding flash. It would be too incomprehensible, too confusing. So be patient. When we choose to come back, we construct an embryo to hold within us the areas of distortion that we need to work on. Then we